It was a quiet Monday night in November 2019 in Bettystown, a seaside town in County Meath, the kind of place where people commute to Dublin, raise their kids, and mind their own business. Most residents were already settling in for the night when gunshots shattered the suburban calm. The violence that erupted on Castlemartin Drive would expose one of Ireland's most brutal gang feuds, drag a small community into national headlines, and demonstrate just how far organized crime had spread beyond the cities. This is the story of Richie Carberry, a man caught between two worlds, whose double life as both family man and drug supplier ultimately led to his execution on his own driveway. But before we dive into this story, if you're finding this content valuable, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We cover the most compelling true crime cases from Ireland and beyond, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Let me tell you about Richie Carberry, 39 years old, married to Eileen, father of 3 kids, Cody, Charlie, and young Callum. If you saw him around Bettystown, you'd think he was just another suburban dad, maybe doing well for himself, sure. He drove a nice black Audi Q7, lived in a decent house on Castlemartin Drive. But Richie Carberry wasn't your average family man. See, Carberry had grown up in Coolock, North Dublin, tough area, and somewhere along the way, he'd gotten involved in the drug trade, not as some street corner dealer. No, Richie was what they call a supplier, the guy who moved serious weight, the guy other dealers came to when they needed stock, and he was good at it, really good. Here's the thing about guys like Carberry. They're not the stereotypical criminals you see in movies. He only had 3 convictions, all minor public order stuff. Nothing that would land him in prison for years. He was smart, kept his head down, used other people to do the dirty work, but being smart in the drug game only gets you so far. Because eventually, if you're successful enough, you're going to step on someone's toes. And in Ireland, that someone might just be from Drogheda. Now, if you don't know Drogheda, it's one of Ireland's oldest towns. Sits right on the border between County Louth and County Meath, about 30 miles north of Dublin. Beautiful historic place. They even hosted a major music festival there. But by 2019, Drogheda had another reputation. It had become the epicenter of one of Ireland's most vicious gang wars. See, there were 2 main factions fighting over drug territory around Drogheda, and Richie Carberry, living just down the road in Bettystown, had picked a side. He was supplying one crew with drugs, maybe weapons too, making serious money. But the other side, they weren't having it. The first warning came in March 2019. Carberry's house on Castlemartin Drive gets shot up. Bullets flying into a residential estate. Could have hit anyone. Kids, elderly neighbors, didn't matter to these guys. Now, when most people get their house shot up, they call the police, right? Maybe think about moving far away? Not Richie Carberry. He refused to cooperate with the Gardaí, wouldn't give them any information about who might have done it or why. That's the criminal code. You handle your own problems. But he wasn't stupid either. He moved his family to a rented place in nearby Laytown for safety. And at the Castlemartin house, he installed bulletproof glass and a comprehensive CCTV system. Think about that for a minute. Bulletproof glass in suburban Ireland. That's when you know things have gotten serious. But here's the crucial mistake Carberry made. Even though he'd moved his family out, he kept going back to that house. Maybe for meetings, maybe to collect things. Who knows? The one thing he should have done was stay away completely. Now, I need to tell you about a Gangland hitman named Robbie Lawler, because understanding Lawler is key to understanding what happened to Richie Carberry. Lawler was Carberry's brother-in-law, married to Carberry's wife's sister, but their family connection was about the only normal thing about Robbie Lawler. By April 2020, this guy had racked up 125 previous convictions. 125. We're talking armed robberies, firearms offenses, you name it. In 2013, he'd held a gun to a security guard's head during a robbery at McDonald's. But that's not what made Lawler truly dangerous. Lawler was what they call an enforcer. When someone needed killing, they called Robbie. The guards suspected him of involvement in at least 3 murders, including a guy named Kenneth Finn in 2018, and David Lynch way back in 2005. This wasn't some hot-headed young criminal. This was a professional killer who'd been at it for years, and he was completely ruthless. Media reports described him as sadistic, the kind of guy who didn't just kill his enemies, he wanted to humiliate them, terrorize them, send a message. The guards had warned Lawler repeatedly that his life was in danger. Did he care? Not a bit. He kept moving around openly, kept doing what he was doing. That kind of fearlessness? It's not bravery. It's the mark of someone who's lost touch with normal human emotions. Someone who gets off on the power, the fear he creates. And when his brother-in-law Richie Carberry got shot up in March, well, that was personal. So we come to November 4th, 2019, a Monday night that would change everything. Richie Carberry had been abroad. The dossier doesn't say where, but guys in his line of work travel for business, if you know what I mean. He flew back into Dublin Airport that evening, landed around 10:30. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Someone knew his schedule. Someone knew he was coming back that night. Because what happened next wasn't random. It was planned, organized, professional. Carberry collected his car from the airport and drove a friend home first. Good guy, right? Always helping people out. Then he headed to Bettystown, probably thinking about getting home, maybe checking on the house. It was about 11:40 p.m. when he pulled up to Castlemartin Drive in his black Audi Q7. Picture the scene. Quiet residential street. Most people already in bed. Streetlights casting those orange pools of light. Carberry parks, gets out, walks to close the gate behind his car. That's when he sees the white van. A Peugeot Bipper van, just sitting there. Probably didn't think much of it at first. Could be anyone, right? Delivery driver taking a break. Someone visiting a neighbor. But then a man gets out. And this man is carrying an automatic pistol. Now, Carberry had survived the March shooting. He'd installed all that security, moved his family away. But all the bulletproof glass in the world doesn't help you when you're standing in your own driveway. The gunman opened fire. 6 shots, maybe more. The sound echoing off the houses, shattering the quiet suburban night. At least 2 bullets hit Carberry. Others went wide, smashing into his Audi, hitting neighbors' cars. This wasn't some careful surgical hit. This was spray and pray. And thank God none of those stray bullets went through anyone's windows.
The gunman hit a number of cars in the area. They say that this is a family estate and any of these bullets could have gone in the window of any of the houses in the estate. And numerous people afraid to talk on camera today, expressing their concern and their fear for their safety and for the safety of their kids.
The neighbors heard the shots, looked out their windows, saw Richie Carberry lying in his driveway, blood pooling beneath him, and the white van already gone. Within minutes, the street was full of flashing lights, Gardaí, paramedics, the whole circus. They found Carberry still conscious, but badly wounded. Here's something that shows you how serious they knew this was. A Garda officer actually drove the ambulance to the hospital. That doesn't happen for your average shooting. They knew this was gang-related, knew there might be more violence coming. They rushed Carberry to Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital in Drogheda, but the damage was too severe. He went into cardiac arrest on the way and was pronounced dead at 12:57 a.m. Richie Carberry, father of 3, was gone. But the killers, they were just getting started on their escape plan. See, this wasn't some amateur job. Whoever planned this had thought it through carefully. They'd used the white Peugeot van for the actual shooting, but they had a second vehicle waiting. Witnesses saw the killer switch to a blue Ford Fiesta with the registration 06D80233. And then this car took off on a very specific route, Culp Road, Donacarney, past the Southgate Shopping Center, onto the N1 at Julianstown. Think about that route for a minute. These guys knew the area. They'd planned this out. Maybe even done practice runs through Knoll Village, through Ballybogle, out into the countryside. And at 12:15 a.m., about 40 minutes after the shooting, that blue Ford Fiesta got torched in a field near Ballybogle, just like the white van had been burned earlier. Both getaway vehicles destroyed. All the forensic evidence, fingerprints, DNA, gunshot residue, gone up in smoke. These weren't street thugs acting on impulse. This was organized, professional, military-level planning. Superintendent Fergus Dwyer was the man tasked with catching Carberry's killer. And let me tell you, he was walking into a nightmare.
This man, we believe, was targeted before, last March. We have active patrols in the area. It's part of an operational plan that we have. And in fact, members were just here at the scene about 30 minutes beforehand as part of our operational plan here.
See, investigating gang murders is nothing like the detective shows on TV. In a normal murder, people want to help. Witnesses come forward, families cooperate, the community rallies around finding justice. But in Gangland, everyone's got a reason to keep their mouth shut.
Nobody seems to be able to cope with it. The authority are doing their best, but
it's a big problem. It's a countrywide problem. It's in every town and village.
And numerous people afraid to talk on camera today, expressing their concern and their fear for their safety and for the safety of their kids.
The guards did everything right. They sealed off the crime scene immediately, preserved every bit of evidence they could find. They had Carberry's CCTV system, which had captured the whole thing. They traced the route of both getaway vehicles. They even put out public appeals through Garda Crime Call, asking for anyone who'd seen the vehicles, anyone with information. But here's the problem with gang murders. The most important witnesses are usually criminals themselves. And criminals don't talk to police, ever. Plus, the feud had the whole area terrorized. People were scared. You see a gang shooting, you don't become a witness, you become a target. The vehicle forensics should have been the breakthrough. 2 cars, both used in the crime, but burning them had destroyed almost everything. Almost. Because here's where it gets interesting. In July 2024, nearly 5 years after the murder, LMFM radio reported something huge, a personal item, left in the burned Ford Fiesta, something the fire hadn't completely destroyed. And this item linked back to a specific man, a Dubliner in his 30s, who was facing extradition from Spain for another murder entirely. Think about that. 5 years later, and a tiny piece of evidence that survived the fire might finally crack the case. But let's talk about what happened to the key players in this story, because that's where the real tragedy lies. Remember Robbie Lawler, Carberry's psychotic brother-in-law? Well, Lawler had his own theory about who killed Richie. In December 2019, just a month after the murder, Lawler got mugged.
Yes! That's only the start of it! That's only the start of it! That's only the start of it, Robbie!
Some kids jumped him, stole his gym bag. Sounds pretty minor, right? Wrong. One of those kids was 17-year-old Keen Mulready Woods, and Lawler was convinced the teenager had been involved in Carberry's killing somehow. What happened next was so horrific, it shocked even hardened crime reporters.
Woods was reported missing by his mother on January 13th, 2020, and partial remains belonging to the teenager were found at various locations in Dublin in the following days, with further remains found in Drogheda.
In January 2020, Keen Mulready Woods was murdered and dismembered in Dublin. Parts of his body were found in different locations around the city. And here's the really sick part. Robbie Lawler left a pair of flip-flops with the remains. His flip-flops, the ones that had been stolen during that mugging. That was his calling card, his signature. He was telling everyone, this is what happens when you mess with me. A 17-year-old kid butchered like an animal because a psychopath thought he might have been involved in his brother-in-law's murder. But Lawler's reign of terror was coming to an end too. In April 2020, he traveled to Belfast with some associates. They were there to collect drug debts, business as usual for a guy like Lawler. But someone was waiting for him. Robbie Lawler, the man suspected of at least 3 murders, the enforcer who terrorized enemies across 2 countries, got shot dead in Belfast. The most violent figure in the feud was gone, but the damage was done. Let's talk about what this did to the community. Before November 2019, Bettystown was a quiet place. Families, commuters, people living normal lives. Then gangland violence literally came to their front doors. Councillor Sharon Tolan spoke for a lot of people when she asked, how does a gunman just drive into a residential estate and murder someone? Where were the guards? How did this happen? And she had a point. The guards knew Carberry was a target. They'd warned him his life was in danger after the March shooting. But there was no protection detail, no extra patrols, nothing. The murder exposed just how unprepared rural policing was for this level of organized crime. The government response was swift, but probably too late. They launched Operation Stratus, flooding Drogheda with extra guards. They commissioned studies, held community meetings, promised more resources. But for Richie Carberry's family, none of that mattered anymore. His wife Eileen became a widow at 39. His kids, Cody, Charlie, and Callum, lost their father. His own father, Peter Carberry, had to identify his son's body at the hospital. The funeral was held at the Church of the Sacred Heart in Laytown on November 9th. Massive turnout. But the guards were there in force too. They were worried about retaliation, about more violence at the funeral itself. That's what this feud had done. It made even funerals dangerous. Here's what really gets me about this story. Richie Carberry wasn't some street thug. He was a smart guy who thought he could walk the line between criminal and family man. He installed bulletproof glass to protect his home. He moved his family to safety after the first shooting. He had CCTV, security measures, all the precautions a man in his position could take. But he kept going back to that house. Maybe he thought he was untouchable. Maybe he thought his enemies weren't smart enough to get him. He was wrong. The Drogheda feud shows you what happens when drug money meets unlimited violence. These weren't the old school criminals who followed certain rules, who kept civilians out of it. These were guys who would shoot up a residential street, murder a teenager and dismember him, terrorize entire communities without a second thought. And the technology made them more dangerous. They used burner phones, encrypted messaging, sophisticated getaway plans. They studied their targets, learned their routines, struck with military precision. But here's the irony. For all their planning, for all their violence, most of them ended up dead themselves. Richie Carberry, shot dead in his driveway. Robbie Lawler, shot dead in Belfast. Keen Mulready Woods, murdered and dismembered at 17. The feud consumed everyone it touched. As of 2024, Richie Carberry's murder remains officially unsolved. That personal item found in the burned car gives investigators hope. The suspect in Spain might finally face extradition. There might be justice for the Carberry family yet, but think about what this case shows us about modern organized crime. These criminals are using counter-surveillance techniques, burning evidence, planning operations like military strikes. They're operating across international borders, using technology to stay ahead of law enforcement. The guards are good at what they do, but they're often fighting the last war. They're set up to investigate traditional crimes, domestic violence, burglary, drunk driving. But when you've got criminals with automatic weapons planning coordinated hits across multiple counties, using burner phones and encrypted apps, burning forensic evidence and intimidating witnesses, that's a whole different game. And small communities like Bettystown, places where people thought they were safe from this kind of violence, they're learning that nowhere is really safe anymore. The drug trade has too much money in it. The criminals are too well organized, and they're too willing to use extreme violence to protect their interests. Look, I've covered a lot of gangland murders over the years, but this one sticks with me because of how it shows the evolution of organized crime in Ireland. Richie Carberry thought he could be a suburban family man and a drug supplier at the same time. He thought bulletproof glass and CCTV cameras would keep him safe. Robbie Lawler thought his reputation for extreme violence would protect him. He thought he was untouchable. They were both wrong. The Drogheda feud claimed dozens of victims. It terrorized communities across 3 counties. It showed that Irish criminals could match anything coming out of Mexico or Colombia for sheer brutality. But here's the thing about feuds. They always burn themselves out eventually. Most of the major players are dead now. The survivors are either in prison or exile. The question is, what comes next? Because the drug trade isn't going anywhere. The money is still there. And there are always young men willing to kill for their piece of it. Richie Carberry's story is a warning. It shows what happens when ordinary people get drawn into extraordinary violence. It shows how suburban communities can become battlegrounds overnight. And it shows that no matter how smart you think you are, no matter what precautions you take, the life always catches up with you in the end. For the Carberry family, the wait for justice continues. For the community of Bettystown, the scars remain. And for law enforcement, the lessons learned in blood are still being applied to fight the next generation of criminals. That white van pulling up outside Richie Carberry's house changed everything. It brought the reality of gangland violence into a quiet residential street. It shattered the illusion that some places, some people, were safe from this world. And 5 years later, we're still trying to pick up the pieces. The murder of Richie Carberry wasn't just another gangland hit. It was a turning point, a moment when Ireland realized that organized crime had evolved, had become more dangerous, more sophisticated, more willing to bring extreme violence into ordinary communities. That's the real tragedy of November 4th, 2019. Not just that a father of 3 was gunned down in his own driveway, but that it could happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And maybe, just maybe, it already has. The murder of Richie Carberry serves as a stark reminder that organized crime continues to evolve and adapt. What happened in Bettystown wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern of violence that can emerge in any community when criminal enterprises take root. Stay vigilant. Be aware of what's happening in your neighborhoods. Report suspicious activity to authorities. And remember that the choices we make, the company we keep, and the paths we choose can have consequences that ripple far beyond ourselves. If you found this deep dive into the Carberry case compelling, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We'll continue bringing you the most detailed investigations into Ireland's most significant criminal cases. There are more stories to tell, more mysteries to unravel, and more lessons to learn from the darker corners of our society. Until next time, stay safe out there.